The Wilson family's annual reunion was just as suffocating as I remembered. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead in my aunt's oversized mansion, their reflections bouncing off designer gowns and expensive watches. The air was thick with the unmistakable blend of overpriced perfume and unshakable superiority that followed my relatives wherever they went. I stood in the corner, watching my cousins compete for attention with stories of their latest achievements. My carefully chosen black dress, simple and unobtrusive, felt like armor against their judgment. "Olivia!" My Aunt Patricia's voice cut through the chatter. I turned just in time to see her approaching, her sharp gaze scanning me with thinly veiled amusement. "I almost didn't see you there," she said, her lips curving into a practiced smile. "Still working as a secretary, dear?" I took a small sip of champagne, concealing my smirk behind the glass. "Administrative assistant, actually." Her perfectly manicured brow lifted. "Still at that little consulting firm?" "What was it called again?" "Summit Solutions," I replied smoothly. Before she could respond, my cousin Ethan, fresh from making partner at his father's law firm, chimed in. "Come on, Liv, I could get you a real job. Something with actual career potential." I thought of the contracts waiting for my signature back at my office. My real office, not the modest facade I maintained for their benefit. "I'm happy where I am," I said simply. Aunt Patricia's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "Darling, you're wasting your potential. Your cousins are executives, partners, real business people. And you're still pushing paper for someone else. If only they knew." The story of how I built my empire in secret began 10 years ago in this very house. Fresh out of business school, armed with an MBA and a revolutionary idea for restructuring failing companies, I had been eager to pitch my vision. I thought my family's vast business connections would help launch my career. Instead, they laughed. "Consulting?" Uncle Robert had scoffed. "Leave that to the big firms, girl. Join the family business. Start in the mailroom. Work your way up, like everyone else." Of course, everyone else meant my male cousins. The Wilsons built their fortune through a carefully orchestrated network of companies, each led by a handpicked male heir. Women were expected to marry well or take subordinate roles, nothing more. That night, I made 2 decisions that would change everything. First, I would build my own company without their help or knowledge. Second, I would make them regret every dismissive word. Summit Solutions was born in a tiny office above a Chinese restaurant. My savings covered the rent, barely. But I had something more valuable than money. I understood how businesses worked, why they failed, and most importantly, how to save them. My first client was a struggling manufacturing firm on the brink of bankruptcy. Every major consulting firm had turned them away. I spent months restructuring their operations, negotiating with creditors, and streamlining inefficiencies. 6 months later, they were profitable. Word spread. Business circles whispered about the mysterious consulting firm that could save failing companies. I hired selectively, choosing only those who shared my vision and my discretion. Every employee signed ironclad NDAs. My name never appeared on public records. I was simply the CEO. Even as Summit Solutions expanded into a sleek downtown headquarters, I maintained my cover. To my family, I remained a low-level employee in a forgettable firm, describing mundane administrative work whenever they asked. They never pried too deeply. The deception wasn't just about pride. It was strategy. The Wilson family empire thrived on acquiring struggling businesses at rock-bottom prices. My firm specialized in saving those same businesses, thwarting their predatory takeovers before they could begin. 10 years later, Summit Solutions was one of the most influential consulting firms in the industry. 12 offices, a Fortune 500 client list, a reputation for transforming dying companies into industry leaders. And not one of my self-satisfied relatives had a clue. "More champagne, dear?" Aunt Patricia's voice yanked me back to the present. She offered a knowing smile. "Or perhaps you should stick to water. I imagine your salary doesn't leave much room for expensive tastes." I accepted the champagne flute with a practiced smile. If only she knew, smile. "Thank you, Aunt Patricia," I said smoothly. "How's Uncle Robert's new acquisition going?" "Williams Manufacturing, wasn't it?" Her smile faltered ever so slightly. "There have been some complications. Nothing Robert can't handle, of course. She had no idea that those complications were my doing. 3 months ago, Williams Manufacturing had come to Summit Solutions, desperate to escape my uncle's hostile takeover attempt. Now, they were implementing our restructuring plan, their stock price was climbing, and Uncle Robert's attempt to seize control was falling apart. I heard they hired some consulting firm. My cousin Ethan chimed in. Probably throwing good money after bad. Consultants are all the same. Big promises, no results. I hid another smile. Summit Solutions' fee for saving Williams Manufacturing was more than Ethan would make in 5 years at his father's firm. Oh, which firm? Another cousin asked. Summit something. Ethan waved a dismissive hand. Nobody important. Dad says their CEO won't even show their face. Probably some trust fund kid playing at business. My clutch buzzed with a message. I checked my phone. Emergency meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. Wilson Ventures representatives requesting merger discussion Williams Manufacturing. Urgent response needed. I read it twice. They were finally admitting defeat. After failing to acquire Williams outright, they were now seeking a merger, which would require approval from Williams' consulting firm. My firm. Tomorrow morning, my family would walk into a meeting expecting to strong-arm their way into a deal. Instead, they would find themselves facing the secretary they had dismissed for a decade. Except I wouldn't be bringing coffee. I would be sitting at the head of a table. Aunt Patricia's voice pulled me back. Everything all right, dear? I finished my champagne and gave her my brightest smile. Perfect, actually. I should head home. Early meeting tomorrow. Oh, taking notes for someone important. I set my glass down. Something like that. The next morning, the elevator doors closed, carrying me toward the executive floor of Summit Solutions. Gone was the simple black dress from last night's reunion. Today, I wore a deep navy Chanel suit, a power color for a power move. As the elevator doors opened, my assistant, Maya, stood waiting with a tablet and a knowing smile. The Wilson Ventures team arrived early, she reported as we walked. Your uncle seems particularly anxious to meet Summit's CEO. I'm sure he is. I glanced at my reflection in the sleek glass walls. Perfect. Are they in the main conference room? Yes. Along with Mr. Harrison from Williams Manufacturing. Maya's eyes sparkled. Your cousin Ethan is there, too. Apparently, he insisted on handling the legal aspects personally. I smirked. Just yesterday, he had offered me a real job. How poetic. Who else? Your Aunt Patricia came as moral support, though she's not officially part of the meeting. And your cousin James, he's representing Wilson Ventures' finance department. A perfect audience. I checked my watch. 8:57 a.m. Have they been offered coffee? Maya grinned. Your aunt complained that there was no one to serve it. I told them the administrative assistant would be in shortly. I nearly laughed. For 10 years, I had played the role of invisible support staff. Whenever family members visited the office, they never looked twice at the quiet woman bringing their coffee. It had been the perfect cover. Give me 2 minutes, I said. Then bring in the contracts. The meeting. I heard their voices before I entered. Uncle Robert's commanding tone. Ethan's smug confidence. Aunt Patricia's sharp laugh. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the heavy conference room doors open. Silence. At the far end of the table, Uncle Robert sat confidently in what he had assumed was the power seat. Ethan and James flanked him, their tailored suits practically screaming family money. Aunt Patricia perched nearby, examining her manicure with practiced disinterest. On the other side, Mr. Harrison from Williams Manufacturing sat alone, looking nervous. Aunt Patricia sighed. We've been waiting for coffee for... She stopped mid-sentence. For the first time, she actually looked at me. Olivia, she asked, eyes narrowing. What are you wearing? And why aren't you carrying coffee? Calmly, I walked to the head of the table, the seat directly opposite Uncle Robert, and sat down. I don't serve coffee anymore, Aunt Patricia, I said. In fact, I never really did. Uncle Robert's expression darkened. What is this? I smiled, folding my hands on the table. This, I said smoothly, is business. Where is Summit's CEO? Uncle Robert demanded, his voice sharp with impatience. We were promised a meeting with the actual decision-maker. I took my seat at the head of the table, savoring the confusion on their faces. You have been, I said smoothly. I am the CEO of Summit Solutions. I have been since I founded the company 10 years ago. Silence. Ethan's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. James dropped his pen. Aunt Patricia's perfectly curated composure cracked. Uncle Robert was the first to recover, his face turning red. This is absurd. You're a secretary. No, I said calmly. That was a cover. A very effective one, apparently, since none of you ever looked past it. You were so convinced I couldn't be successful that you never noticed I already was. At that moment, Maya entered with a stack of contracts, distributing them efficiently before taking her place behind my chair. These documents, I continued, outline the terms under which Summit Solutions will consider approving the merger between Wilson Ventures and Williams Manufacturing. Ethan sputtered. Consider approving? You can't be serious. This is a joke, right? Some kind of elaborate prank. I pulled out my phone and projected Summit Solutions' latest financial statements onto the conference room screen. Summit Solutions currently manages over $122 billion in client assets. I said, my voice steady. We have a 94% success rate in corporate restructuring, and our approval is required for any major changes to Williams Manufacturing's business structure. I leaned back, letting the numbers speak for themselves. Does that look like a joke to you? Aunt Patricia whispered, almost to herself, this is impossible. She looked at me like I was a ghost. You're nothing. You've always been nothing. I turned to her, my expression unreadable. That's exactly what you were meant to think. Then, I shifted my gaze to Mr. Harrison, the Williams Manufacturing executive, sitting across the table. Would you like to explain to my family why you chose Summit Solutions over Wilson Ventures' original offer? Mr. Harrison straightened in his chair, his voice firm. Summit's reputation is unparalleled. When Wilson Ventures attempted their hostile takeover, Summit's restructuring plan saved our company. Since implementing their strategies, we've increased profits by 47%. James looked like he might faint. The plan that destroyed our acquisition attempt, he muttered. That was you. I smiled. Among others, I said, casually ticking names off my fingers. Peterson Tech, Holloway Logistics, Beacon Pharmaceuticals. Each of them was a Wilson Ventures target, until Summit Solutions stepped in. Uncle Robert's jaw clenched. You've been interfering with our business for years. I tilted my head. Interfering. I echoed. I prefer outmaneuvering. I glanced at Maya, who nodded and set the final contract on the table. So, I continued, shall we get to business? Or would you rather keep underestimating me? Electronics, you tried to acquire them last year. Maritime shipping, you underbid on them last quarter. The Davidson Group, somehow, they miraculously recovered just before you could buy them out. I leaned forward, letting the weight of my words settle. For 10 years, I've been quietly undermining every single one of your predatory acquisitions. Uncle Robert's face turned an alarming shade of purple. You deliberately sabotaged family business. No, I corrected smoothly. I built my own business, one that helps companies survive, instead of devouring them for parts. I shrugged. The fact that it interfered with your plans? Just a karmic bonus. This is ridiculous, Ethan declared, pushing back his chair. I'm calling our lawyers. Sit down, Ethan. My voice carried an authority I'd never used on them before. He froze. You really should read those contracts in front of you, the ones your firm spent months trying to secure for this meeting. I watched as realization dawned in his eyes. That's right, I continued. Your law firm's biggest client this year? That was me, too. Maya stepped forward, placing another document on the table. This, she said, is a summary of Summit's current market position and liquid assets. You'll note that we're now in a position to acquire controlling interest in Wilson Ventures if we choose. The room erupted into chaos. Aunt Patricia was practically hyperventilating. James was frantically checking numbers on his phone. Ethan had collapsed back into his chair, shell-shocked. This is blackmail, Uncle Robert growled. I smiled. No, this is business. The kind you taught me I'd never be capable of handling. I stood, smoothing my tailored jacket. You have until 5 p.m. today to review the merger terms. They're very generous, considering our position. If you decline, Summit Solutions will begin purchasing Wilson Ventures stock on the open market tomorrow morning. I turned toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and Aunt Patricia?" I smiled sweetly. "That champagne you so graciously offered me last night? I own the vineyard that produces it. Bought it last year. The coffee you were so desperate for this morning. That chain, too." I picked up my tablet, ready to leave. "Turns out," I added lightly, "my salary does leave room for expensive tastes after all." And with that, I walked out, leaving them stunned in my wake. In my private office, I finally allowed myself a moment to process what had just happened. 10 years of careful deception, of playing the invisible underachiever, had led to this moment. Maya appeared, setting a steaming cup of coffee in front of me. My favorite blend, from my own coffee chain. "Was it worth the wait?" she asked. I thought back to all the times I had served coffee in this very office. The years of watching my family dismiss me, underestimate me, write me off as nothing more than a secretary. I took a sip. Every single second. My phone buzzed, messages flooding in from family members who had no doubt heard about the meeting. I silenced it without looking. They'd have plenty of time to process their new reality. Right now, I had an empire to run. And for the first time in 10 years, I could finally do it without hiding who I really was. They weren't at the top of the food chain anymore. The messages started pouring in immediately after the meeting. "Aunt Patricia, darling, let's discuss this over lunch. You always were my favorite niece. Ethan, come on, Liv, we were just joking around. Family should stick together. James, you can't do this to us. We're blood." I ignored them all. Instead, I focused on the rapid-fire emails from Wilson Ventures board members. They weren't stupid. They could see which way the wind was blowing. By noon, they had scheduled an emergency board meeting. By 3, they had voted to accept Summit's merger terms. Uncle Robert, predictably, didn't go quietly. "You betrayed this family." His voice boomed through my office as he barged in unannounced. Maya moved to intervene, but I waved her off. Let him have his moment. I didn't even look up from my screen. "Actually," I said, typing one last email, "I'd say I learned from this family. Isn't this exactly what you taught us? Seize power, eliminate competition, never show weakness." His hands clenched into fists. "We gave you everything. That made me laugh. You gave me nothing. Less than nothing. You taught me I'd never be good enough. That my only value was in supporting the men in this family." I finally looked up, meeting his furious gaze. "So I built something better, by letting you deceive yourselves." I leaned back, watching his realization set in. "You saw exactly what you expected to see. A quiet, unambitious woman who knew her place. That was your mistake. Not mine." The fight seemed to drain out of him. He sank into one of my visitor chairs, looking older than I had ever seen him. "Why reveal yourself now?" His voice was quieter now. "You could have continued operating in secret. Because it was time." I closed my laptop. "Williams Manufacturing isn't the only company you're trying to acquire. There's Thompson Electronics, Maritime Solutions, and at least 3 others. Companies with good people, solid products, they just need help, not a vulture circling overhead. I'm tired of watching you destroy them." "It's just business," he muttered. "No, it's greed, and it stops now." I slid a folder across the desk. "These are the final merger terms. Summit Solutions will acquire a controlling interest in Wilson Ventures. We'll restructure the company to build businesses up, not tear them down." His fingers trembled as he opened the folder. "You thought of everything." I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I learned from the best. Just not in the way you intended." After he left, Maya walked in, carrying a stack of newspapers. Summit's revelation was already making headlines. Secret CEO revealed. How one woman built a billion-dollar empire in secret. Wilson family shocked. The hidden success story they never saw coming. My phone buzzed. For once, it was a message that actually mattered, from my mother. She had divorced Uncle Robert's brother years ago and distanced herself from the Wilson family's toxicity. Her message was simple. "I always knew you would show them." I exhaled, allowing myself one brief, satisfied moment. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Wilson Ventures board embraced Summit's new direction. Their stock price jumped 40% after the merger announcement. Companies that once feared the Wilson name, now they were seeking partnerships. The press couldn't get enough of the story. Aunt Patricia, ever the opportunist, tried to spin it as a heartwarming family success story. "We always knew Olivia had potential," she told a reporter. "This just proves that the Wilson spirit of entrepreneurship runs in the blood." I responded by releasing footage from last year's family reunion, where she had spent 20 minutes explaining why I would never amount to anything. The video went viral. She stopped giving interviews after that. Ethan, ever the weasel, attempted damage control in his own way, claiming he had been in on it all along. Unfortunately for him, too many people knew the truth. And me. I moved forward. No more hiding. No more pretending. I had an empire to run. And now, for the first time in 10 years, I could do it as myself. Ethan never recovered from the shock of that conference room revelation. Once his law firm's other clients began questioning his judgment, it was only a matter of time. Within a month, he was quietly asked to take a leave of absence. James, ever the opportunist, adapted the fastest. Just 2 weeks after the revelation, he invited me to lunch. "We could dominate the market together," he proposed awkwardly, swirling his untouched drink. The Wilson Summit Alliance would be unstoppable. I didn't hesitate. "That's not what Summit Solutions is about," I told him. "We don't dominate, we elevate." The real changes, however, came in the quieter moments. A young intern tearfully thanked me for showing her that success didn't require compromising her principles. Female executives started reaching out, sharing their own stories of being underestimated, dismissed, ignored. Business schools invited me to speak about building ethical success in a cutthroat world. I stood on stage, accepting the Business Innovation Award. As I looked out at the audience, my gaze landed on my mother, sitting front row, beaming with pride. Behind her sat several of my former administrative assistants, women who had once helped maintain my cover, all of them now thriving in leadership roles at Summit. Success isn't about who has the most power. It's about how you use the power you have. For 10 years, I told the crowd, I played a role that made powerful people underestimate me. I could have revealed myself sooner, but I chose to wait until Summit Solutions was strong enough to create real change. The applause was thunderous, but the real satisfaction came later that evening. Maya walked into my office, holding a document. "You'll want to see this." I skimmed the page, then stopped stunned. Uncle Robert had just announced his retirement. His resignation letter included an unexpected paragraph. "My niece taught me that true business success isn't measured in acquisitions or assets, but in the positive impact we create. I regret that it took losing control of my company to learn this lesson." I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. 10 years. 10 years of careful planning, of swallowing pride, of playing small. And now, Summit Solutions wasn't just successful. It was changing how business was done. The next family reunion would certainly be interesting. I planned to host it myself, in Summit's main conference room. The same room where I had once served coffee, quietly watching and waiting for the perfect moment to show them who I really was. Maya knocked. "Your 4 p.m. is here," she said. "The CEO of Thomson Electronics, the company your uncle was trying to acquire." I smiled. "Show them in." Then, as she turned to leave, I added, "And Maya, bring coffee for everyone." She raised a brow, catching the unspoken meaning. "The good stuff. The very best. From our chain." As I stood to greet my visitors, I caught my reflection in the window. No more hiding. No more playing small. I had built something remarkable. Not despite my family's dismissal, but because of it. They had taught me an important lesson. Power doesn't always look like what people expect. Sometimes, it looks like a quiet woman in a simple black dress, serving coffee and taking notes, while building an empire right under everyone's nose. The tabloids called it revenge. The business press called it strategic genius. But for me, it was simply justice served, one corporate takeover at a time, with a side of perfectly brewed coffee. And somewhere, in a small office above a Chinese restaurant, my original desk still sits. I keep it as a reminder that success doesn't always wear designer labels or demand attention. Sometimes it works quietly, patiently, building something extraordinary, while the world looks the other way.